What's going on, everybody? So I finally managed to defeat Tears of the Kingdom, and let me just say, it's a great game. So here's a video that's just a review, my thoughts, and some theories I have, because it's The Legend of Zelda, and, you know, there's bound to be some theories because of the unnecessarily complicated timeline it's got. Although, like, the Fate series has it even more complicated, so I don't... Let's just get into it. I will have to say, there will be some minor spoilers ahead, so if you care about that sort of stuff, go ahead and click away. But, if you don't care about spoilers, or if you've already played the game, then, you know, have at it. So, for my initial thoughts on the game, it's like, this really deserves to be Breath of the Wild 2, as much as Splatoon 3 deserves to be, well, Splatoon 3. And what I mean is that there's enough of the game that's still just like Breath of the Wild, but there's enough to it that's able to stand out on its own as a game. I mean, sure, there's some features that they added that they could have had in Breath of the Wild if they did like some weird major update or DLC or whatever. But it also has a lot of it also changed a lot of the core mechanics of the game. Like in the previous Zelda title, Breath of the Wild, you used the Sheikah Slate, which had the various runes that you used to, you know, solve puzzles and navigate the world. Breath of the Wild had the Magnesis, which was essentially just a magnet beam that you used to move around giant metal objects. Or any metal object, for that matter. There was Stasis, which would freeze an item in place, and if you were to hit it a bunch of times, it would, you know, catapult into the great beyond. And speedrunners love taking advantage of that. And of course there were the bombs. The bombs were fun. And there were the ice pillars. I don't remember what those are called. But, yeah, which lets you just make a pillar of ice over any body of water. Which is great for, like, traversing across, the waters of Hyrule. Not a lot of them. But, you know, getting across Zora's Domain, or getting from one place, from one island to another, over east and Hyrule. It was a pretty useful gimmick. But all of those abilities have been scrapped and replaced with some new ones, which also help with traversal and other stuff. Ultra Hand works like Ultra Hand. So, minor plot spoiler, Link's hand kind of gets, wrecked at the beginning of the game, like in the main intro, and is like pretty much substituted for someone else's hand. And this hand just happens to be the hand of Rauru, the first king of Hyrule and one of the Zonai. And I'll get into my thoughts on the Zonai later in the video, because let me tell you, I have... Where's the button for that one? Quite a few theories on that one. On the Zonai and stuff. But, just to get the context of the new runes out of the way, Sheikah Slate is also out of the question, and is essentially replaced with a new device called a Purapad, which pretty much just has all the map and camera stuff down. Which is essentially like, remember Purah, the little kid? Yeah, she made like a tablet. It's pretty much like a Sheikah Slate. Not like a knockoff, but sort of her attempt on reverse engineering it, from what I understand. Given the context. Anyway, that's that stuff out of the way. So, what the new hand, Link's new hand, you know, Rauru's old hand anyway, what it gives him is one ability called Ultra Hand, which works similarly to Magnesis, except you can pick up any object with it. Metal, wood, stone, whatever it's made out of, it can be picked up. And it also has another ability where you can use Ultra Hand to attach different objects together to essentially craft whatever you want. And there's a real big emphasis in this game on using Ultra Hand to make whatever you want from it. I mean, like, a really big emphasis. And I'm just watching, like, shorts and stuff. I've seen a lot of people get really, really clever with their builds. I've seen, like, a lot of crazy stuff. And another gimmick, or sort of part of the game, are these devices called Zonai devices. A little on the nose, but what else are you going to call them? They're devices made by an ancient society called Zonai. Like, what else would you call them? Like, gizmos? Anyway. So yeah, you use the Zonai devices to, you use those with Ultra Hand and craft some pretty interesting machines. I have seen all over Twitter people making the most, like, epic Gundam, like, mechs. I've seen war drones, but I've also seen some, jokes, if you know what I mean. I'd rather not Google it. That's all I'm gonna say. Anyway. So the Zonai devices can be, you know, picked up with Ultra Hand and then used to craft pretty much anything you want. Like I said, you can make mechas, you can also make cars, airplanes, hovering devices, you name it, you can make it in this game. And it's really cool. The sandbox style, like, build whatever you want. Like, first game that comes to mind that's sort of like this is Minecraft, but it's not Minecraft. Sure, you can build whatever you want with Minecraft, but, you know, the core mechanic of Minecraft is being able to make whatever you want from literally everything around you. And that's essentially what Tears of the Kingdom does. Except in Minecraft, like, you can make houses, you can build castles, you can dig caverns, you can make some machines using redstone, but they're probably not gonna move unless you're like Mumbo Jumbo. I seriously made that reference. However, in Tears of the Kingdom, what you're not making houses, you're not digging holes, but you are making contraptions that help you explore the world and give you advantages on all the various monsters that are, you know, would kill you otherwise. And yeah. And that's just Ultra Hand. There are other abilities, like the Ascend ability, which essentially lets you just fly up any roof. Not any roof. There needs to be like something of a flat surface for you to go through. But it makes traveling through caves and stuff a lot easier. In fact, they make it so that they intentionally made it so that you'd prefer to use Ascend to get out of caves. And honestly though, it's clever. And when you first start playing the game, you don't really think about using Ascend a whole lot, and then you discover you have it. And I don't mean like when you first get it on the tutorial islands. I mean when you're running around Hyrule Field and you're lost in a cave and you're like, oh shoot, how am I gonna get out? And then you remembered, oh yeah, I can just go up the roof. And then you just can't stop using it because it's so useful. So yeah, that's a pretty fun way to traverse through Hyrule. And another ability they have is they're essentially like a rewind ability, which lets you move objects back to a position they were before they moved. Essentially, like, if a rock fell, you'd use it on the rock, and the rock would return back to the position it was before it fell. And they used it as one of the, skills to, you know, get up to the Sky Islands. Which is, you know, another big part of the game that's a major difference between it and Breath of the Wild. And another... what was the other one? There's one more. There's the auto-build function, which you get after you leave the tutorial islands, that lets you remake whatever contraption or build you made before. to a limited extent, that is. I'm missing one, I just know it. Oh, that's right, the fuse ability, which lets you combine any weapon with any object. So it's essentially kind of like Ultra Hand, but instead of being able to build whatever you want, you just connect any weapon you want with any other material or weapon else you can find. And there's all sorts of infinite possibilities with this one too. You can make a longer spear, you can connect it to like a choo-choo jelly or a fire Lizoff horn to make like a fire spear. You can attach bombs to your shields to give you like a catapulting motion that also, you know, explodes, dealing massive damage to all the bokoblins and Lizalfos around you. And you can use it to attach like carts to your shield, so you can essentially turn shield surfing into a skateboard, which is really fun to do. So yeah, like, the truly sandbox feel of this game is probably its biggest difference between it and Breath of the Wild. Because Breath of the Wild had a big emphasis on exploration, and that was pretty much it. However, this game has the exploration, and then some. I mean, like, more exploration than the last game, because there's a lot more to discover, and a lot of what was in the previous game has been replaced with new stuff for you to explore. And on top of that, there's also you know, the sandbox that I mentioned, the ability to make whatever you want from everything around you, which is really cool and a major difference. This game was 5 years in the making. 5 years. They announced this thing back in 2019 and promised it like a year from then. And then it was delayed, and then COVID happened, and then all the nonsense, and it's finally out, and I am satisfied with the results. This has been a long wait coming, and honestly though, it's great. Anyway, my little beef there and the main core mechanics out of the way. Now you can seem to understand why this is Breath of the Wild 2 and not just Breath of the Wild's reskin. Because they changed the core mechanics. And it's just enough to make a whole new... That alone is enough to make a whole new game. To completely change the experience. It's like when you mod a game to such a point where it's like you've made a whole new experience from that game. Another example, again, is Minecraft. Because, you know, some Minecraft mods go so far and beyond that it's not even like Minecraft anymore, but it still is Minecraft. There are a bunch of other mods for other games, but, you know, everyone knows Minecraft, so that's what I'm going for. Excuse me, my voice is a little tired. Anyway, another major difference between this game and the other game is all the new stuff to explore, like I mentioned earlier. It's the same Hyrule as before, but a lot has changed. I'm assuming like at least 5 years has passed between this game and the previous one. I have yet to find any confirmation of an exact like time this game takes place after Breath of the Wild, but I assume 5 years because it gave time for some characters to age up, and you know, I guess that's literally it. It gave time for characters to age up. For example, remember Tulin? Neither did I until I was reminded he existed when playing this game. Remember the little Rito boy from Breath of the Wild when you're trying to reach Va Meadow, the giant bird divine beast. The little kid who was just trying to, you know, be like his dad. Well, guess what? He's grown up a bit. He's like at least 12 now. But yeah, he had time to grow up. So did Riju, the Gerudo chief that was a kid. Yeah, she grew up too. So I'm assuming at least, like, probably 5 years has passed between this game and the last one. Because a lot of characters have had time to grow up and glow up. Even Purah has aged a little bit. Well, she reversed the aging process from the machine that turned her into a kid in the first place. And pretty much turned herself back into a 20-year-old. So I assume now she figured out how to make herself immortal. That just means infinite waifu. Anyway. So that stuff out of the way. My thoughts on the actual gameplay. It's astounding. I have nothing but high praise for this. This really is, like, probably, this is game of the year right here. Like, I can't imagine any other game coming out this year that could possibly top this one. It's really, it's just so good. It's so good. Because the mechanics, the initial core of the gameplay, all the stuff with Ultra Hand and the Rewind and the Ascend and stuff, like, really makes this, not only makes this game stand out from Breath of the Wild, but actually improves on some of the other stuff. Like, the fusibility. One of the biggest gripes people had with Breath of the Wild was weapon durability. Which makes sense, because Breath of the Wild was supposed to be like an open-world survival game. And it still has the open-world survival mechanics. But they added to it by allowing you to somewhat repair weapons using the fusibility. It also gives you the ability to attach items to arrows to give them various effects. Like you just saw in the clip here next to me, I was trying to use some Keese Eyes to hit a monster over there. And the Keese Eyes turns arrows into, like, homing missiles. You can also fuse, like, fire choo-choo jelly to give it, like, a fire effect. And they replaced the remote bombs in this game with bomb flowers, which is also reminiscent of older Zelda games, because just list all the Zelda games that have had a bomb flower. That's almost all of them. Almost. Not quite all of them, but quite a few ones. Off the top of my head that I remember playing as a kid was Skyward Sword had the bomb flowers. I can't believe I'm mentioning Triforce Heroes. Had them. I know this one too. Oh yeah, Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask also had them. The bomb flowers. But you get the deal. Bomb flowers are back. And you can fuse those with the arrows to make bomb arrows. No more spending 800 rupees on some bomb arrows so you can get through some puzzles. No, now all you gotta do is spend like 20 bucks on a few bundles of arrows. And bada bing, bada boom, collect a few bomb flowers and kaboom. There you go. And it really helps streamline the experience a little bit, I might add. And it's really fun. The only downside is, like, having to infinitely scroll through your inventory just to get to the item you want to use for your arrows. It's a little tedious, but an easy oversight to look over. It's not that big a deal. So yeah, the core gameplay is really fun. And it's also really fun just putting together all the random trash that you can. All the goofy or cool, like, cars, planes, or whatever that you can build. I have found myself making many cars and stuff, just cuz. And you can't exactly steer them without a Zonai device called, like, a Zonai steering stick. It's essentially just a platform you stand on with, like, a steering stick on it that you just, you know, maneuver around to aim stuff. And honestly, though, that's cool. Because it doesn't mean you have to go overtime trying to figure out the physics of absolutely every device and trying to code it in. And instead just having one little thing that you can use to just steer it. Instead of having to figure out, you know, literally anything else. I don't know where I was going with that. But yeah. And now for some of the other stuff. Like, one gripe that people had with the Breath of the Wild was that the divine beasts were not only all pretty samey, and on top of that, was a lack of dungeons, like proper exploring underground dungeons. And they brought dungeons back for this game. Now, I'm not sure if the same depth as, say, Ocarina of Time or even Skyward Sword, but not only do they have dungeons again, and I don't know what was I gonna say with that. Anyway, so yeah, you got dungeons again, and you pretty much explore the dungeon. There's not a whole lot of exploring to do in the dungeons. You still have to, like, activate the terminal in the dungeons to, fight the boss. But the bosses aren't some, like, Ganon variant as in Breath of the Wild. No. Instead, what we got here are actual unique monsters, and even some callbacks. Like, the Goron dungeon, for example, has a giant rock monster Goma. If you remember Goma from literally any other Zelda game in existence, you know that it's a giant scorpion, sometimes spider monster, and you have to hit its weak point, which is the giant eyeball. Same here. Except it's made of rocks. And you gotta use Yunobo's ability to knock down its legs so you can get to its eye. Which is really cool. Which brings me to the sages. Because the last game had the champions, who have all died in the calamity 100 years ago. Because, well, Ganon had a step ahead of everyone. And then when you saved the Divine Beast from Ganon's influence and transformed it, the champions would, give you a safeguard. Like, there was Mipha's Grace, there was Daruk's Protection, Urbosa's Wrath, and Rivali's Gale. And instead of champions, you have sages. And the major difference between the champions and the sages is that the sages are all still alive. And instead of, the... And, they're all still NPCs you can visit in their towns. And what they do is that they give you something of an avatar when you beat the dungeon that you can, summon on your journeys. Riju gives you... And, each avatar has a different ability you can activate by staying next to them and, saying, let's go. Excuse me. Sorry about that, everyone. For example, Riju summons a, lightning storm that when you hit something with an arrow, it goes, kaboom! There you go. Tulin gives you a little gust of wind that goes horizontally that gives you a boost when you're using your paraglider. Which is really useful, because, traversing through the sky, you're going to need all the boosts you can get. Yunobo has this cannonball attack that leaves a trail of fire and it, breaks rubble and stuff. Which is real useful, when you want to get some monsters out of the way, or if you're trying to break through some boulders. And Sidon gives you a bubble shield that, when you attack, it sends like a jet of water in the direction you're facing. Again, pretty cool. And essentially, each dungeon is using the sage's ability to activate a terminal to then, reach the boss. Nothing too bad. And there's enough different between each dungeon so it doesn't feel samey like all the Divine Beasts did. I mean, there's the essential themes of, ice, fire, electric, or lightning, and water. But they're all different enough in their own ways. Like, the Ice Temple was a giant boat in the sky that you had to get to. The Fire Temple was a giant underground fortress that you had to, essentially fall through Death Mountain to get to. Remember Death Mountain? The giant volcano? Yeah, you have to go down it. Except now it's not a volcano, and instead there's a bunch of stuff called gloom, which is essentially the substitute for malice in this game. And the Desert Temple is essentially this giant pyramid that reemerges from behind Gerudo Town. And the water temple is a bunch of flying islands where a bunch of goop is falling on top of the Zora because of this, icky little monster. And there's also a fun new place to explore. Because, you have Hyrule as it was before, with some added structures, some stuff removed, stuff replaced, stuff added. And you've also got some... Excuse me. My voice doesn't like talking for this long. You also got some, crap. I lost my train of thought, sorry. You also have... Ah, shoot. Sorry, everyone. There's also the underground to explore. What's the underground? Well, it's this massive expanse under Hyrule. And it's a big, dark, very ominous place. Very spooky, very scary, and there's like a bunch of different monsters. And there's a gimmick with the underground that the gloom there, plus the monsters' attacks, don't just take hearts. They limit your max hearts. Essentially what happens if you're standing in the gloom for too long or get hit by a monster that's like infected by the gloom, you get a heart kind of somewhat permanently taken away. Your max hearts gets reduced by how many... by, 1 or 2 hearts, depending on how long you stand in the gloom or how much damage the monster does. And yeah, it's really cool. Because, like, you gotta be careful. And it's also real dark down there. Like, you can't see anything without a proper light source. So, of course, there's a special suit of armor that, makes the area around you glow by making you the light source and stuff. There's also these new, like, plants called Bright Bloom Seeds that you hit or shoot with an arrow that, make these stalks that makes the short area around it glow. And then there are these stations that you can teleport to down there, but only when you activate them. They're essentially giant Bright Bloom stalks that when you activate them, it illuminates a massive area around you that you can then, see what you're doing and properly explore. There's also a bunch of really cool stuff hidden down here. Like, all the DLC content, like all the extra outfits and stuff from the Champion's Ballad and the Breath of the Wild DLC is just stuff you can find down here now, which is really cool. I've managed to find the Tunic of Time from Twilight Princess. I found the Majora's Mask. I found the... They say Tunic of Time from Twilight Princess. I mean Ocarina of Time. I'm sorry, everyone. I found the Tunic of Twilight from Twilight Princess. I found most of the Wind Waker gear. And that's all stuff you could have only ever gotten if you got the Breath of the Wild DLC. Essentially, they added $10. Like, people were initially upset of this game being $70 instead of Nintendo's usual $60. And, Bowser came out and said, like, well, it's because I feel like this is a more full game compared to any other game. You'll find a true, fulfilling experience in this. And dang, he's right. All the stuff that was in the DLC, it's here. Well, all the cosmetics anyway, none of the added challenges. But it still makes up for it because there's still a bunch of new shrines to find. So all the Sheikah shrines have essentially been replaced with some Zonite shrines. And that's pretty cool. And then... So yeah, all the Sheikah stuff. Like, one thing that irked me at the beginning of the game, somewhat irked anyway, is that all the Sheikah stuff essentially just disappears after the event at the beginning of the game. It's like, you're left to assume that it was all pretty much destroyed during what everyone is calling the upheaval. Which makes sense. Because, like, a massive calamity happens that opens massive sinkholes in the ground that open up a massive expanse of underground. while simultaneously bringing giant sky islands to the sky, making massive sky islands appear, whilst all the debris fall onto Hyrule. Like, temples are broken, stuff's misplaced, the giant goddess statue in that canyon, yeah, it's toppled over. And that's a little scary to think about. Like, this upheaval was so big that it managed to not only wipe out all remnants of the calamity from 100 years before, but essentially just, kind of replace a lot of the Sheikah stuff. Like, even Kakariko Village, the Sheikah village, has a bunch of, like, ring ruins around them. This game deserves to be Breath of the Wild 2, and it deserves to be Game of the Year. Hands down, no questions asked. This is the game. It's just the game. No exceptions. I mean, I got back to playing Splatoon 3 because it's Sizzle season, and I wanted to get, all that added content in that game, but if that didn't happen, I would have been playing this game for, like, hours more. Not hours. I managed to beat this game in under 60 hours. And at least a third of that time was spent exploring. 60 hours of gameplay just to beat it. Just imagine. Just imagine. This game is big. And it is great. And it is glorious. Anyway, those are my initial thoughts on, like, the gameplay and stuff. The story's really good. At the beginning of the game, story spoilers, by the way, so I don't really know what time to skip to, but, story spoilers ahead. Just warning you. Give that warning at the beginning of the video, but I'm gonna just make sure y'all know now. Spoilers. At the beginning of the game, you and Zelda are exploring this mysterious, like, expanse that's under Hyrule Castle. And I say expanse, it's more like this ancient room, these ruins that are just under Hyrule Castle. And Zelda's geeking out because there's all this mysterious ancient artifacts and murals and statues. And she's like, oh my goodness, Link, it's all the stuff from the Zonai, from Hyrule's founding, like, God knows when. And, yeah. And then eventually you find a room where Ganondorf is being detained by Raru's hand. And eventually the magic just fades and Ganondorf reawakens as essentially a giant mummy. Which is super ominous. His intro in the game is, like, so scary but so cool and intimidating. He manages to break the Master Sword with his malice alone. And then, the upheaval happens. Zelda falls, but she gets something called, she gets, like, this mysterious stone, and she gets sent back in time. And pretty much, the game after that is spent, trying to find her and beating Ganondorf. That's all I'm really going to give for now, because honestly, though, go play this game for yourself if you haven't yet, because it is amazing. And honestly, though, all the backstory stuff, it hits in the feels in the right ways. And it's all good. It's all so very good. I'm not spoiling anything else. I'm gonna just say that straight up about the story, especially how it ends. And oh man, the ending, the climactic battle, it's good. Like, people had a problem with beating Dark Beast Ganon, the giant pig monster at the end of Breath of the Wild, because it was pretty simple. You had the light arrow, you had the light bow that you used to hit the weak points that Zelda made on the being literally made of Ganon's malice. But this one, the final climactic battle, is pretty different from that. There's still weak points to hit, but it's so cinematic, you just have to play it for yourself, because it's that amazing. And that's all I really got on the story, pretty much. I mean, the upheaval does cause disasters in, like, surrounding, in, like, the Rito Village, Gerudo Town, Zora's Domain, and on Death Mountain, of course, that you have to go investigate and fix. And I'll just, give a little rundown of stuff. So, Rito Village is caught in a massive blizzard, and it's so bad that the Zora not only are unable to fly anywhere to collect resources, but the snow is so heavy it essentially damages all the bridges, so no one else could come visit them either. You're essentially stuck. So yeah, you beat the dungeon boss for Rito Village there and save the day. All the ice melts and stuff. Way to go. And for Goron Town, up on Death Mountain, the Goron discover this mysterious rock that's actually part of, Marble Goma, and they essentially get addicted to it. It's clearly a drug reference, sort of. It's like, crystal meth! They essentially get addicted to these rocks, and they don't want to do anything else. And there are a few sane Gorons left, only because they didn't eat this mysterious rock and refused to. Because they see the harm it's causing their friends and stuff. So then, Zora's Domain, like I said earlier, is being, is covered in this sticky, gooey muck that's making the Zora sick. Because they're fish people. They need clean water to survive. And what this muck is essentially doing is dirtying their water supply. They essentially can't breathe because of all the muck. And Gerudo Town is caught in, take this, a massive sandstorm. But this sandstorm is also, has a bunch of weird zombie bug monsters in it that's, they're terrifying, and their, only weakness is fire and lightning, so you gotta, scary. Seriously, it's pretty scary, but these Gibdos, they're called, they're monsters. Some of them have wings and fly around, and it's just a little unsettling. And there you have it. That's some of the basic plot stuff for all the spoilers out of the way, and my thoughts on the game. I'd give it a 10 out of 10. Amazing, outstanding game. Definitely, I know I've said this a dozen times already, this is Game of the Year. Hands down, no question. If this doesn't get it, then I'm going to write a complaint to whoever's responsible for the Game Awards, because golly gee, god goodness gosh, this game deserves all the praise it gets. People credit, despite its flaws, people still credit Breath of the Wild as one of the greatest games ever made. This is better than Breath of the Wild. I'll have to say it. It's better than its predecessor. It's that good. So yeah, those are my initial thoughts on gameplay and the story and stuff. It's good. Really good. Outstanding even. Some stuff is simple, some stuff is not very complicated. But it doesn't need to be amazing. And there you go. And now for the fun, to have some fun with it. It's theory time, baby! So one thing that people, I've noticed, don't tend to agree on is when this game takes place. I know there is the initial, confusion on when Breath of the Wild takes in the Zelda timeline. And the devs were pretty much well, you see, it takes place so far ahead in the Zelda timeline that pretty much nothing else, none of the other games really matter in its consistency. And that's pretty much the Zelda devs being okay, listen, the timeline was already something of an accident. It's complicated even for us, so we're just going to make this game detached from all the other games, deal with it. We're going to reference every other game at the same time, because, yeah. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom work really well as a celebration of the Zelda series as a whole. But for that reason, people are not sure when the game takes place. And I don't necessarily mean the present. I don't mean the events of Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild. I mean the past, where Zelda winds up. Because, well, I said I wouldn't do any more spoilers, but yeah, I warned you at the beginning of the video anyway. So Zelda ends up in ancient Hyrule during its founding, where she meets Rauru and the Queen Sonia. Rauru is a Zonai, you know, the ancient people ancient people. And Sonia is Hylian. Not only is she Hylian, she's a Hylian with the goddess. I assume she's a Hylian with the goddess blood, like Zelda. Because, you know, how else is that going to make sense? She's Queen Sonia, he's King Rauru. It wouldn't make sense any other way. So then, you know, people think that this game comes before or right after the events of Skyward Sword. Which makes sense. That's why I initially thought too. But there are a bunch of things, like, that you see in the past from all the cutscenes and stuff that just wouldn't make sense if it were right after the events of Skyward Sword. It just doesn't make sense. And the biggest one is the Gerudo. Because the Gerudo in the timeline, I'm pretty sure, didn't officially, like, exist until weren't, you know, officially a part of Zelda until the events of Ocarina of Time. Canonically, anyway. Canonically, the Gerudo did not exist until sometime before Ocarina of Time. And, like, the Gerudo are seen in the flashbacks. Like, Ganondorf is a Gerudo. He's, like, the one and only male Gerudo. Like, in the final battle against Calamity Ganon in Breath of the Wild, Urbosa makes a comment about how Ganondorf was once, or how Ganon, in a time of legend, once came in the form of Gerudo, essentially taking the place of the one male Gerudo that's born every 100,000 years or whatever. Like, I initially assumed she was talking about Ocarina of Time. I mean, so did everyone else. But the events of this game make you think that, what if she's talking about these events in early Hyrule, where Ganondorf was, you know, when Ganondorf was around? Because Ganondorf was a Gerudo. So my theory on when this timeline takes place, or essentially what happens, is that there was this massive convergence of the three timelines, where they all merged together, becoming canon. They are canon with each other. Like, they're all true at the same time. That would mean that Wind Waker, it happened the same time as Twilight Princess, and that Link to the Past happened at the same time as the, you know, former two. So there must have been some massive, like, time paradoxal calamity so devastating it led to essentially the destruction of Hyrule, allowing the Zonai to come and, you know, fix it. I saw a theory video about this after I beat the game initially, and I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Because the theory was essentially that Zelda going back in time sort of merged all the timelines. But I have a little gripes with that theory personally. I don't remember. I don't remember the video 100%, even though it was like literally a day ago. But yeah. Because, you know, when Zelda initially goes back in time, Hyrule has already been founded by Rauru and Sonia. Ganondorf is already plotting his takeover of the Kingdom of Hyrule. So, clearly, there was a calamity that happened, akin to Hyrule, the first initial Hyrule Warriors game, where, you know, something so devastating that eventually Hyrule had to essentially be reset by Rauru and the Zonai. Rauru married Sonia, and they, you know, refounded Hyrule, essentially. So yeah, that's my theory. The events of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are so far ahead of the future because they take place in a timeline where all the timelines somehow merge together. And the devastation of that sort of... Just imagine, it's like in Multiverse of Madness. I know I'm referencing Marvel here, but hear me out. Essentially traveling, messing with the multiverse leads to, I forgot what it was called. Essentially, a calamity so devastating that it ends to the destruction of one or both universes. So what if something similar happened to the Zelda timelines? All three of them merged together. And the result was so devastating, it essentially just reboot Hyrule. So, the Zonai, Rauru, mostly, and Sonia had to essentially reestablish the Kingdom of Hyrule. And, you know, that's my theory as to when the past in Tears of the Kingdom takes place. Still far beyond the events of Ocarina of Time, but so ancient in the past for for Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild that essentially all other timelines just faded into legend. And now for my theory as to what the Zonai are, because the Zonai are pretty unique to this game. Like, they have not appeared anywhere else, from what I'm aware, they have yet to appear anywhere else in the Zelda franchise. Like, legitimately. But I think mayhaps they have. Hear me out. Long time ago, the first game, in fact, canonically after the events of Skyward Sword, was The Legend of Zelda: The Minish Cap. And in that game, we are introduced to the Picori, who are these race of tiny elf people. And when I mean tiny, they are small, like the size of ants, who come from the sky and save Hyrule in its time of need. That's the backstory for the Minish Cap, anyway. And the Picori actually prefer to be called the Minish. That's what they call themselves in their native tongue, because anyone else hearing the Picori language, the Minish language anyway, hear the sound Picori. Picori. Like that. Like, that's literally the text they give you when you initially start talking to the Picori and the Minish Cap after you shrink for the first time. And then you, like, get this little item that helps you understand their language and stuff. So yeah, that's the Picori and the Minish Cap. And my theory is, the Zonai are either descendants or directly related to the Minish, somehow. I mean, the parallels and similarities are a little uncanny. Mostly thematically speaking. Because according to legend established in Tears of the Kingdom, the Zonai came from the sky to save Hyrule, to found Hyrule, essentially. Who else came from the sky? The Minish. Why did the Minish come from the sky? Well, who knows? It was no doubt a direct response to the events of Skyward Sword. Because, again, the Minish Cap takes place directly after Skyward Sword. I mean, long enough for the events of Skyward Sword to become something of either history or legend. But still, canonically in the Zelda timeline, the Minish Cap comes second. Now, I know this might seem like it's contradicting my previous theory about the Zonai finding Hyrule taking place after all three timelines. But, again, hear me out. The Minish also share some design similarities with the Zonai. Essentially, they're the way their heads are shaped. Because the Zonai look something like goat people. The Minish don't exactly look like goat people, but what they share is the shape of their heads and their massive ears. Like, essentially like an ellipse of a head, sort of. And big floppy ears. That's a design choice that they have in common. Now, I know that's not enough, per se, to exactly relate them directly like that. But tell me it doesn't make sense. Essentially, also, the thematic similarities that they have. Like, long ago, the Zonai came to save Hyrule and essentially establish its kingdom. In the Minish Cap, in Hyrule's greatest time of need, the Minish come down with the Minish Sword, gifting it to a hero to save the world. I mean, thematically, they are almost identical. Both the Minish and the Zonai come down from the sky to save Hyrule in its time of need. The Zonai to establish it, and the Picori, or the Minish, to assist the hero in saving the realm. It makes sense. So, wrapping around this conclusion here, my theory is that the Zonai and the Picori, if not, like, ancestrally related somehow, like the Zonai being direct descendants of the Picori, or the Minish, as they prefer to be called, then the Zonai are somewhat offshoots, like at least close relatives of the Picori, because of the thematic similarities, and even some design similarities. But hey, that's just a theory. A game theory! Thanks for watching, see you guys later.